Several hours into the nationwide invasion, including within the massive campaign unfolding within the Dallas-Fort Worth area metroplex, the two different battalions, one air assault battalion from the 83rd Air Assault Brigade of the active duty 83rd PLA Group Army attached to the PLA's 59th Reserve Group Army for the express purposes of this particular battle, along with one of two armored battalions from the PLA 59th Group Army's 16th Infantry Division had both converged onto the downtown of Dallas to carry out their respective but complementary operations as it pertained to both the air assault and armored battalion. As the air assault battalion had been tasked with the complete seizure of the downtown of Dallas as a major objective, as it was to become a red zone or a Chinese colonial nerve center after the complete and total conquest of the United States, along with the armored battalion's objective being the complete and total eradication of the 2nd of the 198th, an American armored battalion from the 155th Armored Brigade Combat Team, itself being attached to the 36th Infantry Division's 56th Infantry Brigade Combat Team, as this particular brigade was in overall command of the entire defensive operations as it pertained to the entire metroplex as it now stood, as the 155th Armored Brigade Combat Team was also part of the 36th ID. This one particular battalion from this particular brigade had been sent in to the east of the downtown of Dallas, along with an adjacent sector of the city known as Deep Ellum, as the bivouac sites had effectively been established in these zones. The PLA had to ensure that not only could the 2nd of the 198th not enter downtown and thus completely ruin the objective of capturing it intact, as this would have entailed even more destruction, but also this was a unit that effectively had to be eradicated in place as fast as humanly possible, as the operation was extremely surgical and precise in nature, not only in terms of the cooperation, but the timing of it. The two different battalions, as the air assault forces naturally arrived first, as they were the most mobile of all the forces of the PLA on this area, they, along with the slower-moving, albeit fast-moving, armored battalion, as it had hurriedly eradicated small groupings of armed reactionary civilians, including with heavy artillery support in the second grouping on their flank clearance operations en route to the downtown, had now effectively created a sort of kill box as it pertained to the east of the downtown of Dallas, as the air assault forces landed in the four cardinal directions of the downtown, as the different air assault infantry companies within the air assault battalion had landed in these areas in order to effectively create an outer cordon of sorts around the downtown and then enable themselves to sweep the downtown as well. As the armored forces arrived on scene, they effectively assisted in this endeavor, although their primary objective was the destruction of the 2nd of the 198th. They had two different groupings of their maneuver companies with two tank companies and one armored infantry company apiece, crossing the I-30 bridge crossing captured by the 1st Landing Air Assault Infantry Company from the Air Assault Battalion, holding this vital crossing, allowing for the armored forces to move into the downtown and conduct a hammer and anvil sweep through this area, as the two different groupings of the maneuver companies, again 2 tank and 1 armored infantry apiece, effectively spread out and moved in an eastbound direction, while the other grouping swung around through I-30 and into Deep Ellum to the north, creating a devastating kill box in the east of the downtown of Dallas, as well as also including parts of Deep Ellum. As again, this was several hours into the invasion. Many different maneuvers were taking place to enable this kill box to develop, as armored infantry forces cleared buildings on the periphery, as the enormously powerful 300 millimeter rocket artillery of the PHLO-3 battalion had conducted a very brutal, albeit precise, strike of a narrow but lengthy section of the easternmost end of downtown, while also avoiding any major damage or destruction to State Highway 75/I-45, as 75 and I-45 were ostensibly the same highway, as this section had been heavily rocketed by 300 millimeter rockets, with a hotel that was a bivouac site of the headquarters company of the 2nd of the 198th being hit by multiple DH-10A cruise missile strikes, with the vehicles on their top of the parking garage being eradicated by the 300 millimeter strikes and cruise missile hits. The attached support company was also heavily hit in the Deep Ellum area beyond the east of the downtown, leaving only, effectively, the combat maneuver companies, which consisted of 3 tank companies and 2 rifle companies, which effectively were the American equivalent of the PLA's armored infantry, as one American tank company, the Alpha Company, had already been intercepted in the north of downtown and destroyed by the northernmost PLA tank company of the first grouping of 3 maneuver companies to cross. The anti-tank company and headquarters and support company of the PLA's armored battalion had by now set up on the west bank of the Trinity River and were offering enormous fire support in the form of the AFT-10 HJ-10 ATGM-based systems, firing massive salvos of these highly potent and relatively long-ranged ATGMs with a max range of 6.2 miles, outranging any ATGM system that was in the American possession, as in the Eastern Transit site of the downtown of Dallas, a major battle was unfolding between the tanks of the PLA and the tanks of the Americans, as the PLA tank company in the south was now moving into the area with 2 platoons each in the south, as they were also assisted to their general south by a platoon of the air assault infantry, as these forces had again been flown in to the east of the downtown, as again the 4 cardinal directions were the 4 landing zones, to prevent the American armor from entering the downtown. These forces were effectively repelling the American armor with a combination of their man-portable ATGM systems and also light anti-armor systems, which could effectively destroy American armor personnel carriers and possibly IFVs if hit in the right places. These forces were instrumental in assisting and providing vital infantry support to the southernmost PLA tank company of the armored battalion operating in this particular area of the downtown, as the armored infantry as well were offering heavy resistance against the oncoming American forces. They too fought with man-portable ATGMs, utilizing their enormous advantage when it came to their ISR superiority and dominance to call in all manner of strikes from different weapons types, which included, again, the HJ-10 ATGM systems, as well as also the attack helo gunships assisting them in their targeting capabilities, as well as also this was also being conducted by the air assault infantry forces as well, operating in the area as they took up positions in rubbled buildings and began to fire these potent ATGMs, as well as use their ISR apparatus to assist also in the targeting of the AI target-seeking mode in the CH-901A loitering munition systems. Many of these now in the area equipped with the heat warheads, which were absolutely devastating against heavily armored targets and even light bunkers. As the fighting again had developed into a devastating killbox 70mm rocket fire, 25mm autocannon fire, as well as also AKD-21 ATGM fire, was now being offered up in support of the ground forces by the Combat Aviation Company within the Air Assault Battalion, not only assisting their own ground troops who were maneuvering through rubble piles created by the heavy artillery strikes from the shaping of the battlefield having been conducted by the 300mm PHL-3 battalion rather. These forces were bounding and covering tactically through the rubble piles and offering up heavy resistance again against the oncoming American armored forces, as in this particular area, a platoon of American tanks, M1s, are advancing through rubble, much like in this image here, and the PLA air assault troops are firing back with everything they have, as a rifle company in the south was arriving into the area. Every movement the Americans made could be seen throughout the entirety of the DFW metro area, and this was simply because the PLA had enormous quantities of squad and vehicle crew level quadcopter surveillance assets, as well as also the high altitude reconnaissance drones and the even higher altitude satellites of the PLA's military satellites, which effectively all overlaid to provide a complete 3D mapping of the fluid, ever-changing battlefield conditions, as the enormity of the salvos of the CH-901A loitering munitions, the firepower of the Z-10 attack helo gunships, as well as the heavy firepower from the main battle tanks, who themselves were capable of firing ATGMs from their 125mm guns, as well as a variety of different ammunition types, simply annihilated all in their wake as the rifle company advanced and began to dismount their different squads, and armed reactionary civilians fled the area of Deep Ellum. More rocket strikes from 300mm rocket systems of the PHL-03 battalion began to rain down into Deep Ellum and smash large portions of this neighborhood, while also avoiding any major damage to the highway infrastructure, which would later be vital for logistical and troop movements of the PLA forces. There was also close air support in this particular battle, assisting the armored infantry forces as the Americans dismounted some of their infantry platoons from their rifle company in the north, as well as using their Bradley IFVs, as well as their M250 cal equipped M113 APCs to combat the very powerful ZBD 04A IFVs of the PLA's armored infantry and their robust Type 89A armor personnel carriers equipped with their own version of a Chinese 50 cal, which was the 12.7mm W85 heavy machine guns. As these forces went toe-to-toe in this particular area, 1,000-pound munitions hit American vehicles, along with heat warhead-equipped CH-901A loitering munitions. As the troops moved into their rubbled positions, tactically bounding and covering, the Americans did the same, and heavy combat ensued in this particular area between the two different infantry forces of the PLA armored infantry and, of course, the American riflemen of the northernmost rifle company. As in this particular image, a PLA soldier is laying on this cascading wall from this former building, throwing a hand grenade over it in this general direction, while other troops offer their rifle firepower support, while their squad NCO is operating their quadcopter squad-level recon asset, and CH-901As are coming in to target enemy forces, while also ATGMs, such as the HJ-08, are also being fired as well. As in the background, 300mm strikes are occurring in the distance. The combat in this particular sector of the city was heavy and savage, and totally destructive in every way, shape, and form, as another American tank company, one of three of their second of the 198th Armored Battalion, was arriving on the scene. It was hit heavily by an airstrike of 4 1,000-pound munitions from a JH-7 strike aircraft, as well as also the heavy firepower coming in from the AFT-10 ATGM systems being targeted through the use of the ubiquitous PLA surveillance apparatus, as the quadcopter assets assisted greatly in the targeting of these vehicles, as well as also attack helo gunship strikes with 70mm rocket pods now opening up on these forces throughout the battlefield and raining down total absolute devastation. Leading up to all of this combat, now over several hours in, as this battle wrapped up by the 4th hour in the east of the downtown, was the flank clearance maneuvers that were occurring in all areas of the city to support the seizure or destruction of the key objectives in the Metroplex. As in the south, the 16th Infantry Division at 12 a.m., with the opening tandem anti-satellite strikes and cyber strikes, was deploying its wide array of battalions against various targets on the flanks in order to clear areas along the key invasion route, such as I-35E, as well as also even I-35W, which ran through Fort Worth, and also areas in between. One such area was the absolute total eradication of enemy forces using 2 mechanized infantry battalions to strike in the Grand Prairie area, not only against a large grouping of armed reactionary civilians that had materialized and had become a minor threat in the area for the PLA forces, but also against the Taylor Army heliport, a key site that was originally closed during the BRAC closures during the late 90s and had been partially leased out for civilian usage, but the bulk of the facilities had been reinstated and were still now being utilized by a number of company-sized American units, the majority of which had already either been mobilized and deployed or were about to begin prior to the initiation of the Sino-Russian coalition invasion, but were unable to deploy as the initiation of hostilities had effectively put a stop to this. As a number of logistical stores exists on the site correlating to the different tenant units, 2 companies and a small detachment of helos, as in transport helos for the logistical resupply operations throughout the city, were present at the Taylor Army heliport at the time of the initiation of the invasion at midnight. Taylor was effectively an Army and Air National Guard and also reserve installation. Included in the assortment of Guard and Reserve units was the 2nd of the 14th of the Marine Corps. This effectively was the Marine Corps' first ever HIMARS artillery battalion. However, only the headquarters company, or battery rather, of this battalion was present at the time of the invasion, as the other batteries, effectively the firing batteries, were from out of state and had, as of the commencement of hostilities, not yet arrived. Charlie Company of the 949th Brigade Support Battalion of the 56th Infantry Brigade Combat Team was, however, present at Taylor as well at the time of the invasion, and there was a Chinook detachment from the 90th Support Battalion of the 244th Expeditionary Combat Aviation Brigade. These were effectively there to assist with the logistical resupply operations of the units that were out in the field throughout the city for the 56th Infantry Brigade Combat Team and their attached units. Included in this was the 1st of the 204th, again from the 66th Troop Command of the Mississippi National Guard, which was not part of the 36th ID, but also the 2nd of the 198th of the 155th Armored Brigade Combat Team that was also part of 36th ID, like the 56th Infantry Brigade Combat Team. As we go to the map of this particular area in Grand Prairie, the Taylor Army Heliport was hit immediately by PLA artillery from the 16th Infantry Division's Artillery Battalion of self-propelled 155mm PLZ-05 howitzers, as well as an assortment of missiles, which included DF-11A tactical ballistic missiles, as well as also DH-10A long-range cruise missiles fired from across the border by the 612th and 613th Strategic Missile Forces brigades, which were sitting in Mexico, which were reinforced by the called-up reserve battalions that operated such systems, among others, as well as also the 616th Strategic Missile Forces Brigade, an actual Trojan unit in eastern Texas, firing the DF-11A tactical ballistic missiles at the site, in addition to the artillery strikes. In this particular map, this was the Taylor Army Heliport's main facilities, as this fence separated the leased-out area to civilian usage, which included a distribution center for Home Depot and also projects relating to the local cities, as the land had been leased to their use as well. But on this side, where the runway system had been established, as well as many of the military buildings, and even some that were to the west and to the north of this particular map, were all now being struck by tactical, ballistic missile, artillery, and cruise missile strikes. There were also 3 Wing Loom 2 dedicated combat drones firing their CM-502KG missiles, which were the anti-ship, anti-tank missiles, as they had the penetration ability to penetrate battleship armor, which was why they were a dual-purpose missile, and now were being used against these ground forces. Again, the headquarters battery, of the, which was a company-sized unit, effectively, of the 2nd of the 14th Marines was present on this facility, along with the Charlie Company of the 949th Brigade Support Battalion. And, of course, there was a small detachment of the Chinook helicopters, which again came from the 90th Support Battalion of the 244th Expeditionary Combat Aviation Brigade. There was also a small number of loitering munitions equipped with HE warheads, which were capable of destroying light armored vehicles such as these MRAPs, among others. As there was also a J-10 fighter aircraft operating in the area. It would end up firing its PL-12 air-to-air missiles at 2 Chinooks that were effectively airborne at the time of the initiation of hostilities, as there were also 2 HQ-12 systems from 1 firing battery from 1 of the 2 HQ-12 battalions present that were part of the 59th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, firing within range at targets in this area, as they had multiple firing batteries consisting of their HQ-12 air defense artillery systems, as each system carried 2 missiles apiece. 2 systems from 1 of the handful of firing batteries of 1 battalion had effectively fired 4 missiles at the airborne Chinooks, the same Chinooks that were being fired at by a PL-12 missile apiece from this J-10 fighter, as a QRF force had now moved down from guarding the northernmost fence line of the facility as the hostilities were underway, and these Wing Loom 2s began to fire multiple CM-502KG missiles at ground targets, such as these grounded Chinooks that were being unloaded and also loaded up with other supplies by the ground-based logistical elements, as certain supplies were being unloaded while other supplies were being loaded. The Wing Loom 2s fired salvos of these very powerful air-to-ground missiles at these targets, and the DF-11As were also coming in at this time. These circles signify the blast radius of these very powerful tactical ballistic missile systems, as well as these 3 DH-10As that were hitting this same area. Artillery barrages were now coming in a gradual raking up and down of the battlefield as the multiple firing batteries, as there were 7 firing batteries and a headquarters and support battery within the 16th Infantry Division's Artillery Battalion. The 56 total howitzers were now effectively mostly firing at the Taylor Army heliport at this initiation of hostilities, as off the map to the west and just slightly north of this map, these areas had already been savagely pummeled by 155 strikes, and the strikes would continue as indicated by these imminent strike markers throughout this particular target area. And as trucks were frantically trying to flee, as there was a large number of LMTV trucks and also HETs, which were heavy equipment transporter trucks, and up-armored Humvees in the area, these, along with a large number of troops, along with the buildings, which consisted of hangars and office buildings, which included where the logistics were stored by these company-sized units, were being totally smashed at this time, as well as also being hit by the Wing-Loon 2 dedicated combat drones, as these Wing-Loon 2s were relatively cheap, highly effective, and very easy to mass produce. As these vehicles tried to flee, they were hit by loitering munition strikes, including these MRAPs, and these MRAPs would be hit by loitering munitions as well. These vehicles would be destroyed by artillery, as well as also loitering munition strikes. These up-armored Humvees were already annihilated by artillery strikes at the opening of this map. These areas had already been hit by tactical ballistic missile strikes, completely razing these buildings to the ground. As the Taylor Army heliport was effectively, as an entirety, being razed to the ground just south of the lake that this facility sat on, as the civilian side for the time being was mostly left alone, although the military side was completely annihilated. To the south of the lake was a number of suburban neighborhoods, effectively comprising the bulk of the city of Grand Prairie, as I-20 ran through this particular area, connecting southern Dallas to Arlington and beyond. If moving westward on I-20, Grand Prairie effectively sat in an area of relatively hilly terrain, as southern Dallas effectively was in lower elevation, and as one were to move westward through Grand Prairie on I-20, the elevation continually raised until one reached Arlington, which sat on higher ground. So throughout this hilly terrain, there was a number of large suburban neighborhoods. There was also mixed commercial and industrial sites. There was a food processing plant in this particular area. There was a trailer park. There was a park with a baseball diamond, a football field. There was also hotels along the highway, such as right here. There were suburban housing neighborhoods. And, of course, in this particular area here, there was a pharmacy and a bank and a gas station and a motel. All of these areas were now hotly contested, and as the PLA forces of the 2 mechanized infantry battalions operating in this particular area were on their drive northward to clear the flanks, one of the 2 battalions committed 3 out of their 6 total mechanized infantry companies to effectively create a kill box and hurriedly eradicate as many of these armed reactionary civilians as fast as possible, as again, these operations on the flanks were vital to the movement of forces to major objectives. For instance, capturing downtown Dallas. This armored battalion had to hurriedly move towards the downtown, and as a result of the larger flank clearance operations underway, had minimal operations to conduct en route to its main objective, which was the destruction of the 2nd of the 198th. Another mechanized infantry battalion would move along I-35 east, and then getting on I-30 would move towards an area where they would cross the Trinity River in South Dallas. They would exit and move north to clear Northwest Dallas and Garland of armed reactionary civilians assisted by combat engineer forces in this area before moving on hurriedly to destroy the 2nd of the 142nd, a mechanized infantry battalion also part of the 56th Infantry Brigade combat team deployed in the northernmost end of the Dallas city to effectively defend that particular area. As this flank clearance operation and others nearby were instrumental for their own reasons, as in securing segments of the vital invasion route, as this was a key node that, as an entire metroplex, had to be hurriedly secured for the easy and efficient movement of the external components of the major invasion routes that moved through the city before converging again in Gainesville, as this was a massive node that had to be secured. The objectives within it that had to be either taken or captured had to be supported by the other units conducting the flank clearance operations, such as what was occurring in Grand Prairie, as well as also in neighboring Arlington, for instance, as well as also clearing flanks along the key invasion routes and more. As this large flank clearance operation was instrumental in the ease of movement of the armored battalion towards a major objective, which was to clear downtown Dallas. The efficiency of this operation was assisted and coordinated with the command elements through the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which guided the company-sized maneuver elements in their operations to effectively box in and destroy a large grouping of armed reactionary civilians, while also securing I-20 as a major unit movement and logistical route through this particular area. As the headquarters and support company and the fire support company of the battalion operating in this area of Grand Prairie, while the second of both battalions was moving to the east and moving northward, the battalion operating in this area, using 3 out of their 6 mechanized infantry companies, having their fire support company and headquarters and support company, which were the command and logistical elements sitting further back, would now use these forces to again pen in this area and effectively create a kill box, pushing away the armed reactionary civilians from the highway infrastructure to both secure it and push them into an area where they could be easily managed and destroyed. Again, it has to always be understood and made crystal clear that without any communications whatsoever at all, due to the tandem anti-satellite and cyber strikes, as well as the inability to have any type of real ISR capabilities, the American armed reactionary civilians and military forces alike, this early on in the invasion, effectively had to bunch up into large groups in order to communicate through earshot and line-of-sight communications, or if they were more distant, they had to use runner-based communications, effectively people that were willing to risk their lives moving through the battlefield to send messages back and forth to coordinate actions between groupings of defenders. As this was exceedingly difficult under these conditions, the response against the invasion forces was haphazard and effectively ineffective in every way, shape, and form, as these defenders could not effectively coordinate, they were not cohesive, and they had no central leadership, at least among the armed reactionary civilians. And as far as the American military forces, commanders at the lowest levels had to take initiative that they would never have had to be put in a position to do any time if they would have had communications and proper ISR capabilities. As on this particular map, we see 3 out of the 6 total mechanized infantry companies of one of the 2 battalions, and there is one company with its combat elements effectively guarding the southern end of the kill box and blocking access to I-20. They have their headquarters platoon, which is their company's command and logistical forces just to the south of I-20, while another company is moving its combat assets in the west, moving them to the north, while in the east, there is a third company moving to the east to block in this entire area, while 2 platoons of the mechanized infantry had been dismounted from their vehicles, leaving 1 platoon mounted in their vehicles that would be dismounted as this company's vehicles spread out and moved down this particular access road just a little bit to this gas station. Upon reaching this area quickly, they would be dismounted and begin to engage armed reactionary civilians, while these 2 squads of this platoon would guard the southern approaches, which was I-20 and through the underpass here, while these 3 squads would use this gas station as a position whereupon they would begin to engage armed reactionary civilians with the assistance of loitering munitions equipped with fragmentation warheads. As the vehicle-based firepower of the company moving east, in the east moving north, would engage this technical, which was simply a pickup truck with armed men inside, while artillery strikes would come down at the opening of this map as it opens up. 155 strikes are annihilating these groupings of armed reactionary civilians by this wooded area here, and imminent strike markers indicate more firepower coming into the area. As this grouping of armed reactionary civilian technicals is trying to flee the area, as heavy mortar strikes are now coming in to assist these 2 platoons moving through the area, effectively pushing these groupings of armed reactionary civilians into a kill box. These combat actions here in the south, in this particular corner of Grand Prairie, were especially savage, as in this area, heavy machine gunners operating their W-85 heavy machine guns on the turrets of the Type 89A armor personnel carriers are laying down heavy fire through these forces, guided by the real-time AI battlefield data processing systems and the quadcopter squad/vehicle crew-based ISR assets, which are also assisting in the targeting of the 120mm heavy mortars coming in from the fire support company of this battalion, which operated their PLL-05 heavy mortar/assault gun dual-purpose weapon systems, as this could also be brought forward and used as a direct assault gun weapon to attack enemy strongpoints, such as what's being done with this building, supporting the mechanized infantry dismounts in this particular image here in this urban battle scene. As the combat, again, was heavy through this park, and as the terrain was quite steep in this area at certain points, these squads of this platoon were separated by a relatively steep incline in this particular area as the elevation raises up, and this access road goes up this elevation. These troops and these 2 squads are bounding and covering tactically through this area, encountering no resistance, while these 3 squads of this platoon in this park area are bounding and covering through this wooded area here tactically and are now encountering resistance at the opening of the map, as is this squad right here. As they have intersecting fields of fire, they are tactically using their fire advantage and their ISR advantage to find and destroy, whether with small arms fire and light anti-armor/anti-personnel weaponry, or using loitering munition strikes against these forces, while also using their quadcopter assets to effectively direct the fire of their 120mm mortar systems from their fire support company's PLL-05 platoon against this group right here. As again, this is a large kill box in the making, and as survivors flee this area into this area, the quadcopter assets get the coordinates for precision artillery strikes, although a massive barrage is called into this area. Also, airstrikes are called in as well, all guided in by the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which itself is hooked up through the entire ISR surveillance apparatus, which effectively brings in the precise coordinates to put together pre-prepared strike packages from everything from airstrikes to artillery strikes to the fire support strikes from the light artillery systems operated by the fire support company within this mechanized infantry battalion, which is their PLL-05 dual-purpose systems, and their versatile and highly effective 130mm Type 63 multiple launch rocket systems. as these could lay down an enormous barrage of firepower against enemy targets. There were 2 firing platoons of these within the fire support company, but there was 1 firing platoon of the PLL-05s. These Type 63s were kept in service due to their high reliability, their high efficiency, their ability to lay down mass destruction on enemy targets as a fire support weapon, especially infantry and light vehicle targets, and also certain buildings, and their ease of reloading and transport. These were very effective weapons as a result, and thus were highly enjoyed by the mechanized infantry troops when they used them for fire support on enemy suppression operations or destruction, as also the artillery was very heavily used in this kill box. The 155 shells as well laid down enormous destruction. It was a complete symphony of mass death orchestrated through the combined might of the 155 millimeter PLZ-05 self-propelled howitzers of the 16th Infantry Division's Artillery Battalion, the Fire Support Company with its Type 63 multiple launch rocket systems, and their very potent and capable PLL-05 dual-purpose assault gun/mortar weapons, and the airstrikes, which were very powerful coming in from the JH-7 strike aircraft operating in this area, as there was also another JH-7 to the north of this area operating just off the map. It too was conducting airstrikes against fleeing targets trying to escape the kill box. As the large number of hundreds of armed reactionary civilians were being completely slaughtered in this area by the heavy mortar strikes in conjunction with the mass artillery barrage in this area where it was heavily concentrated, the 4,000 pounds of air-to-ground munitions dropped by this JH-7, which continued on as soon as the map opened up. It virtually was already here, dropping another 4,000 pounds on this large grouping, along with the loitering munition barrage, as the headquarters and support company of this one of 2 mechanized infantry battalions operating this area had a combat drone section which operated the 48-tube TEL-based system, which is a truck-mounted multiple-tube system for the CH-901A loitering munitions, which assisted heavily the troops on the ground and the vehicle-based forces with the vehicle-based firepower as they had their staggered weapons moving as they moved through the area to block in the kill box. These forces, led by their powerful ZBDO-4A IFVs, 1 per platoon, with 4 armor personnel carriers consisting of the Type 89As with their heavy W85 12.7 millimeter machine guns, laid down enormous destruction against enemy targets. The ZBDO-4A IFV possessed multiple weapons, including its main gun, which was a 100 millimeter main gun, with its co-joined 30mm autocannon, which was enormously devastating as well in its own right, as well as also the 2-pod HJ9 ATGM systems. These were highly capable IFVs and were now turning these civilian suburban neighborhoods into complete and total war zones, as the total pandemonium was now erupting in full throughout Grand Prairie. As in this particular image, 30mm autocannon fire had created large craters in the street, blasting debris and pieces of pavement in all directions, completely annihilating this fence and personnel that were behind it, shredding them into multiple pieces and throwing debris into this house, as well as also the heavy fire peppering this automobile on this suburban street that comes off this main road, and these dismounts from this infantry fighting vehicle taking up positions in this drainage ditch along this property, engaging these armed reactionary civilians in a heavy firefight. In other parts of Grand Prairie, the dismounts were using the terrain to their advantage, as the different dismounted squads moved through the more wide open spaces of suburbia, as Grand Prairie had a relatively steep, elevated terrain in terms of its overall terrain features. These forces, when using high ground, could rain down enormous firepower on their targets below, all guided through their own squad level ISR assets, as used to connect to the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which steadily updated the combat data links, which also acted as a transponder, and this tablet was also used to operate their own ISR asset to map the battlefield in real time. As enemy assets were seen and destroyed, they were removed in real time, and the same went for their own side, although this was exceedingly more less common for the PLA to lose their assets. It also applied to them whenever it did happen. As in this particular image, there's a large home with a swimming pool and a wall, a walkway connecting it to other parts of the suburban area, and in this rock formation, there's an armed reactionary civilian hiding behind it, while the squad NCO is throwing a hand grenade towards this person's general direction, and the personnel of the squad are laying down heavy small arms fire, with the riflemen utilizing their QBZ-95 assault rifles, with the QBJ-201 light machine gunner laying down heavy volumes of fire, and the barrel-mounted 35mm grenade tube operator firing a 35mm grenade. Another member of another squad, off in the distance, is firing an HJ-08 ATGM at targets below. Another one had already impacted in this area and had blown personnel into different directions, also limbs, such as one landing in the pool. It's an armed reactionary civilian trying to take cover behind this brick wall as it's being pelted by 5.8 by 42mm rounds from the squad above, firing their weapons in that general area down the hill. Scenes like this were now common throughout the area. Other savage scenes developed as well, as this particular convoy of armed reactionary civilians and their technicals is trying to flee through this area. They were seen by squad-level quadcopter assets, which linked into the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which put together a strike package for the 130mm Type 63 multiple launch rocket systems of the two firing platoons from the fire support company of this battalion to engage these forces as they tried to flee. All of these rockets in this still image, this is a still image effectively of the destruction, are in different stages of exploding. This one has just ignited, others had ignited split seconds before, this one's just ignited, and so with this one throwing debris and whole vehicles in multiple directions, flipping them over or ripping them into shreds and throwing the debris everywhere, or simply tossing the vehicles feet up into the air, such as what's occurred here as well. This one's being thrown 5 feet into the air by an exploding rocket. These 130mm rockets were absolutely devastating on the enemy targets, as the concussive blast wave and shrapnel shredded human body parts into pieces, along with the devastating flying debris, which was exceedingly dangerous to be near. As this road has been targeted by these systems through the ISR apparatus, the 130mm Type 63 systems had effectively hit the forces utilizing this road as a means of escape out of this kill box, as artillery had come into this area and hit multiple targets as they had hurriedly fled the scene. Again, there's multiple occurrences happening all at the same time or near the same time on this map as it opens up. This was a very short-lived operation which lasted a matter of 30 minutes for all of this to occur. This entire kill box with all the artillery, the airstrikes, and even hitting targets beyond the kill box, as these forces had effectively cordoned this area on 3 sides, and anything trying to flee north was hit by an additional JH-7 strike aircraft, as these could carry nearly 20,000 square pounds of air-to-ground ordnance, which was simply enormous. The aircraft to the north of the kill box had more than enough ammunition available to it to annihilate anyone trying to escape the kill box. Heavy mortar strikes annihilated these personnel, as well as the dismounted infantry squads of these two platoons, tactically bounded and covered through the park, to the north of the park on the higher ground, and through this trailer park on both sides of the road, and through the trailer park engaging these forces here, while these forces tried to escape as the rounds simply shredded right through the trailers of the small arms. These personnel were wiped out and also hit by a loitering munition strike while they tried to flee. As mortars landed and debris was being thrown at them, they went around this food processing plant only to be struck by precision artillery strikes that came in. As these vehicles moved through the area, they utilized their firepower tactically with these two dismounted squads in a perfect L vector of fire. All of this enormously destructive and highly effective in terms of the vectoring of fire and the precision of all of the weapons working in concert. As these forces were gathering behind the hotel, they were shredded up by W-85 12.7mm heavy machine gun fires, as well as loitering munition strikes. This house, completely destroyed by this 4,000-pound air-to-ground munition strike from this JH-7, which dropped 4,000 pounds at the opening and continued on rapidly to hit these forces in a matter of 1 second, as this is a very small area. It was only a 1.5 mile by 1 mile area, 1.5 east-west by 1 mile north-south. And effectively, on the large map, this was the area right below the Taylor Army heliport right here. And there were hundreds of armed reactionary civilians annihilated in this area, and several thousand non-combatants as well. It was a heavily destructive and short-lived combat action as it unfolded and resulted in massive destruction of this suburban neighborhood. As these forces moved through the area and these forces tried to flee, they too were shredded up by 100mm shell fire, 30mm autocannon fire, which shredded right through this house, and also the W-85 heavy machine gun fire of the following vehicles of the lead platoon, the 4 following Type 89A APCs. As all of this was going on, these forces tried to flee and were hit by artillery strikes. There were other combat actions unfolding elsewhere throughout the Metroplex at the same exact time as this map takes place. Literally only 20 minutes in, as the 2 mechanized infantry battalions from the 16th ID moving into this area are now moving into place. It only took them 20 minutes to cross I-20 and move into this area of Grand Prairie, while other battalions were conducting their own operations in their own respective areas. Many would not flee this area successfully, although a small number would, only to be again hit by a JH-7 strike as they left the main kill box, as these 2 technicals managed to flee barely, and this one at the lead, connecting with another one, fled up this street here along this ridge line. They, again, would be hit by airstrikes as they left this kill box, while these were all annihilated at the very opening by artillery strikes. This home badly damaged on the periphery of this strike here. All of this enormous destruction caused, again, by a well-concerted effort of the fire support company's assets, PLL-05s, of the PLL-05 platoon and the fire support company, the 2 firing platoons of Type 63 130mm multiple launch rocket systems, enormously heavy 155mm shelling coming from the PLZ-05 self-propelled guns of the 16th Infantry Division's Artillery Battalion, as well as also massive airstrikes from the JH-7 aircraft flying through the kill box zone. The mechanized infantry troops, of course, played their part as they secured the area and pushed the armed reactionary civilians into a devastating, well-constructed kill box. More to come in the next video installation of this hypothetical invasion documentary series highlighting fourth-generation warfare doctrines through the guise of a Sino-Russian coalition invasion, as the Battle of Arlington, another large flank clearance operation, will be featured next. Part 1 and Part 2. Part 8. More to come.